Welcome. Hello. My name is Emma Irwin. I am a sales engineer for Dataiku. I'm located in Toronto, Canada. And today I'm going to be walking you through a sort of demo project that we've created, but really hoping to highlight some of the key qualities of the Dataiku platform in general. So we'll get started with a couple of slides. Nothing too crazy, don't worry. And this is just to show sort of how we remove the friction, if you want to consider it that, of creating data science and AI projects at scale. So while I'm walking you through these slides and the further project, I want you to keep in mind sort of three main qualities. One is governance. Dataiku is one centralized place from which all of your data work is going to happen. So teams can keep documentation of data sources with, say, sensitive or proprietary information. They can view what data is being used for any given project and who owns that data. You can see what's been done on a specific project or task, track the history of the data, see where it's used, where it came from. The second key quality is about collaboration. So when I mentioned teams working together, that is critical, both within and across your specific delegation. So, if you have a couple of analysts who are working with more advanced data scientists or non-technical business users, you can all come together to collaborate and follow the best practices that have been laid out by some of the data experts in your organization. Finally, and these two words kind of mean the same thing when we come together for a Dataiku, it's about reuse and automation. So there's a ton of ways that you can make these components that you're seeing on the screen, whether they are about cataloging and connecting, whether it's about exploring or preparing, doing auto machine learning, sharing your insights, etc., making them reusable and automatable. So recipes, scenarios, applications, you'll learn about them today, and it will save you and your team a ton of time. So a lot of potential here. And we're agnostic, as you may have seen kind of show up at the bottom there, to whichever platform you want to use. So if you're an on-prem shop, if you're a hybrid environment, or if you've picked one of the main cloud providers, we can definitely meet you where you are. In addition, we are non-industry specific. So Dataiku is really about serving customers across all industries, and the analysts and other people have really nice things to say about us. So I thought I would start off with some of those slides before jumping into the platform itself. Hopefully you can keep those three tenets in mind as I go through this project, those being governance, collaboration, and reuse. And we'll get started. I'm going to be using this demo project today called Rental Properties. This is a project which we've used some open source data from just Kaggle to use. And you can see right here, I've got sort of a project or command center where it lists the various artifacts, as well as gives me an option to write a wiki or where I can put in my business goal or methodology. And then all of the work that I do will be held in this, which is called the flow. The flow in Dataiku starts as a blank canvas, so none of this would initially exist. But as we add data sets represented by blue squares, and then recipes, which are represented by the unique circles throughout, we start to see the lineage of our project. Here, again, we've pulled that open source data. So there's one called listings and another called calendar. And these can be thought of as like individual tables, or, like if you're used to working with Excel spreadsheets, it's tabular data in some form or another. Neither of these are particularly interesting on their own. So to get a better idea of how they actually work, we end up putting them together. And I can show you that over here. I'll start off with the quick join recipe. So you can see, if you're comfortable with SQL, this will probably be very familiar. We are doing what is called a left join to keep all of the rows from the left data set and add information from the right data set. We're ultimately doing this on a condition called the ID, or listing ID, and we've selected a whole bunch of these columns. What that does is gives us an output data set that we can start to work off of. So you can see here the explore view, as we call it in Dataiku, which is a sampled view of our data. Why sampled, you might ask? And how do I configure it? Well, it happens right up here. And the reason is because Dataiku is designed to help you work with big data sets, and sampling allows us to show you fast and responsive visual feedback on simple data transformations without needing to reprocess the entire data set to generate a preview. If you need to change the sample size, so here the number of records, or if you want to change the way that the sample is explained or explored, you can absolutely choose from here random number of records or approximate ratios, stratified sampling, last records, sort of world to oyster in this case. But to get to know the data a little bit better, you can also start to poke around in this screen. One of the things I like to do is keep track of the distribution of the various columns. And one easy way to do this is from here, where I can choose Quick Column Stats. My quick column stats give me information about the various columns in my data set, so across the sample that I've chosen. And we can really dive into what we're seeing here. So something that may be kind of interesting is potentially the reviews per month, or as you saw a little bit earlier, at this price column. Eventually, throughout this demo, I'm going to show you how we create a machine learning model which will predict the price. So it's interesting to see the distribution here of the various costs per night. Now, once I've done that, I may also want to look over the data itself in more detail. And so here I can see that I've got a whole bunch of records for this individual listing hosted by Simon. It's not particularly representative, so I'm going to go back to that sample and swap it out for random. While I'm doing that, we can take a look as well at how Dataiku is representing each of the data components. First, you're going to have a gray text which reflects the storage type itself. And that indicates how the data is being stored in the backend. The meaning, on the other hand, here in blue, gives a semantic label to the column. And the data quality bar, which is underneath it, indicates the proportion of records in the sample that are valid for the assigned meaning. So right now, if we look over at something like maximum nights, for example, you can see that there's some type of disconnect between the integer meaning and the number of records here that are valid. Well, part of the problem is that you can see visually there are a ton of null values. Those null values are represented here in that gray component. So it's actually telling us, we can click in and analyze, that there are roughly, looks like 17% null or empty values. So something to keep in mind as we move forward with our analysis, so that we don't get confused or misinterpret some of the data moving on. Now, that we have a bit of a better understanding of our data itself, we can swap over to our prepare recipe. And all I've done now is just sort of dove in a little bit. And how did I get to my prepare recipe? One of the ways that Dataiku makes it really simple to interact with the data that you're using is this panel on the right-hand side of options. You can see really quickly that there are a ton of visual recipes up here, things like group bys, so that you can perform various kinds of aggregations based on the values of a particular column. You may also want to use a distinct recipe if you want to filter for distinct rows. If you were getting a bit more particular about your training and testing sets, you could split them out using either a random seed or specific values. But for now, let's do common operations in what is called the prepare recipe, which I've selected from here, which is the broom. I've actually eliminated all of the steps that I took previously so that we could go over it together. And so the prepare recipe is one of the most detailed or sort of customizable recipes inside of Dataiku. And it actually gives you over 90 ways of processing your data. You can choose from here, but it might be a little bit overwhelming. So another option you have is to hover over a column name, such as neighborhoods, and see what Dataiku suggests for you. One suggestion we have here is the unnest object. So if you weren't clear, we're viewing our data set, which looks like some JSON, right? All kind of consolidated information. Instead of writing some Python to open it up, we can simply unnest, and we'll get two new columns auto-generated for us. Let me see if I can just move this from the bottom for now. Here we go. To actually get a clear delineation of where the individual listings are. Again, these are rental properties, right? So they have to exist somewhere. And simple operations like deleting an additional column can be done through this method as well. We also work really well with dates. And if you have information about your listing or the calendar that it came from, it's likely that you're going to have date information. So let's come in here and choose the date object and parse that date. Transforming it into a date object that is dedicated and cleansed, which means that there's consistent format throughout, is going to make the rest of our analysis a lot easier. It will help us to build charts and visualizations in the future, but also makes visual analysis as a human a little bit more enjoyable. So I've done it there with a consistent format listed out, and I can again remove the old option. What else may I want to do? Well, a date is a good piece of information, but what if I wanted to go a step further and actually parse specific date components? So, for example, the year or the month or the day as a separate item, so I could either, model or visualize in the future. That would work perfectly, so I can leave it as is. And again, Dataiku is auto-generating all of these columns for me, so not a ton of work on my end. Now, some other pieces of information that I may want to do is potentially adjusting some of my pricing columns. This one is an adjusted price, and it is considered a string value or a money amount, but I don't need the $sign for my own analysis. So something I might do here is highlight the $sign and replace it. Replace it with what, you might ask? Well, actually with nothing. I would prefer to have a piece of information here, in this case, a decimal notation that doesn't include any dollar value, and potentially in the future consolidate with other represented currencies. Now, if my end goal is to eventually predict prices of units, then having all of these entries with no price is actually not very effective. So what I will do here is come to the drop-down again and go to the Analyze option. Something I may want to think about in the future is removing rows outside of a specific interquartile range, right? So considering those outliers. But for now, I'll leave them, and in fact, only remove invalid rows for this meaning, or when adjusted price is empty. Let's go with that one. Note how this changed and updated, and how many rows were affected in my sample. So one thing I want you to keep in mind when I said reusability earlier or automation, if you were doing this process time over time, it's possible that this same set of cleansing steps would be consistently performed. So it's very easy for us to run this down below. I'll do it now. We're told that the schema is changing, and that's okay. But if I wanted to, I could eventually put this onto a scheduler, and that scheduler would run this set of steps for me whenever I needed. So perhaps that's once a month, perhaps that's once a week, or on some type of trigger that's customized for my scenario. Now, there's a lot of other things that I may want to do. It's possible that I have some geographic information, which, when you're talking about houses would make sense. And in this case, I have a latitude and longitude. Eventually, I may want to actually create a geopoint out of this. And so I will go now to my options at the bottom and create geopoint from latitude and longitude. Again, super simple. I'm not having to write any code in this case. I just need to input what my columns are and what my output will be. And Dataiku will create it for me, as well as highlight it in blue so I can see what's going on. Let me think about what else I could potentially do on my data set to cleanse it. Well, we've seen a couple of different analyses that relate to numeric values. It's possible that you're going to want to write a formula on one of these values. If that's so, we could take this column, for example, availability 365, and we could process it with a formula. You can really do this on anything, but I think it's most obvious when you work with numeric. And you can see I opened the editor panel. So the editor panel is actually going to give me some assistance as I work. So if I write an if value without this being closed, it will tell me. And it's telling me, as you can see here, that we're expecting some more information. So I've given it the column title, and we'll say, if this is greater than 365, then let's leave it at 365. And if not, let's include the actual numeric value. So when it's 0, it stays at 0. When it's 307, it stays at 307. But if we have any values that are over 365, meaning that the unit or listing is available for more than a year, let's just cap it so that it makes an easier analysis. Great. We'll save it. We can run this now or in the future and hop back out to our flow. You can see the input data set that we explored earlier, the broom, and then the output data set, which we'll eventually use for this, which is a process of creating the model. Now, with a data set like this, we can drive some real insights for this sort of fictional business. But we could also see if there's any kind of hidden information in the statistics or charts tab. Let's dive over there. And I had to build this out. As you can see, whenever we make upstream changes, they're going to create downstream effects, which is awesome. So we always know that we're looking at the most recent or updated version. And I can go into statistics where I've created a bivariate analysis with price as my feature and a bunch of different factors to review. So how does room type potentially impact price? We can see the distributions and analyses, and creating new cards, even if you're not a sort of wizard at a statistical analysis, is easily done too. Open up a new card, choose which kind of analysis you'd like to do. Maybe I'm interested in how many different room types we have, distribution of price again, minimum nights. There we go, and create. Here we go. Now we have histograms, summary stats, quantile tables, frequency tables, and more. And publishing them to a place where you and the rest of your team or executives can review is also very easy. If you ever heard us referring to them as cards, this is what those are. A card in Dataiku is just basically used to perform a specific EDA task. So as you can see here, we're describing our data set, we're drawing some inferences about the underlying population, and we may be analyzing some of the effects. Now, I'll click publish, and we can look at that slide after, which you can see I've already started to populate and gives us some exploratory information on the data that we have. So I've visualized where, in this case, in Madrid, these locations are, the distribution of the neighborhoods themselves, and then, as you saw, some of the statistical analysis. Going back to our data set itself, I'm going to flip over to another tab called Charts. And here is where we can create information like the one we just saw in that dashboard really easily with the drag and drop, choosing X and Y values that reflect what you're interested in, and then the type of visualization itself. Whatever is easier or makes the most sense for you to consume, explain, and understand. This is a way that you interact visually by dragging and dropping these variables into a wide variety of options. And like I showed before, one of those options that may be interesting to us in this case is actually a map. So, bringing over that geopoint we created and then creating the sort of color scale and details by a specific variable as well. Of course, tweak this or change this to whatever you need. Change the sample, change the explanation. You can do whatever you need. And it really is a great way to get a better understanding of the underlying data before you start to model, because that extra information is going to lend itself really well to building, better predictive algorithms. Now, if you want to build your algorithms, you can do it yourself. So I showed previously that we have this panel on the right-hand side, which allows you to open up and work in Python, R, if you're doing more simple analysis, SQL, etc. But for now, we'll focus on the lab component. The lab component is where we hold or house our AutoML functionalities. And this is basically like a sandbox environment for experimentation and iteration so that you can test things out before deploying them onto your flow. And so for us, we wanted to do an AutoML prediction. And when you open it, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure game, if you want to call it that, where we have adjusted price, which is that feature that we kind of updated and changed, right? And we can click interpretable model for business analysts to get a ton of information about what we're doing. When I click create, Dataiku will automatically select 2 different algorithms that it thinks may work for this use case. And it starts training them. So in this case, we have a decision tree and a ridge regression, which finished very quickly, I think in about 3 seconds each, and are a little bit biased. How do I know that that's the case? Well, I forgot that there was another column, which is not adjusted price, but price. So using the information from that, Dataiku is doing a great job of predicting what the adjusted price might be. But I'll come over here to the design tab. Just for reference, I was here and hopped over here, and I will come into feature handling and look for that. Turn off. You can do the same for any of the features that you have, as well as choose how you want to handle, scale, impute, or even what their role will be, so rejected or input. Similarly, you can impact the individual algorithms. So if you want to test out any of the open source and very popular algorithms in scikit-learn or XGBoost, absolutely. And if you want to write a custom Python model, all it needs is a classifier and then a fit and predict method, and you should be good to go. With that, you're going to be able to really customize what you're doing, because it makes it so that your choices are easily reflected and understood. Here, our decision tree even has some information for those of you who might be getting started with modeling in the first place. Last thing I'll show is the training and testing set. By default, we're splitting the dataset you've provided the AutoML into an 80-20 split for training and testing on the first 100,000 records. If you have a more specific split that you want to use, you can always extract those datasets earlier on and then choose them here, or split other datasets, or make this as custom as you need. I'll train this again just to show you what happens when you have a second session. It now gets added to our dashboard here, where we can view all together in a table, sort by various metrics, or click into an individual one. Basically, what I'm hoping to convey is that the AutoML will choose basically the best settings for you, depending on your task and the data provided, but you also have the full visibility and control over all of the modeling levers that you just saw. This is really the anti-black box. We are trying to give you the full keys to the castle here. You can confirm or adjust settings of the target variable, the training set, the testing set, whether you want to turn on cross-validation, and so forth. And you can even then adjust what metric you want to see these compared against, as well as what it should optimize for. Watch as these switch, and the little trophy moves. So basically, Dataiku is making the best guesses about your feature handling, but you can, of course, update these as you wish. Finally, like in the Python that I just showed, you can select, if you want to eventually sort of deploy your custom or Dataiku auto-generated models. And so when you're done and you're actually satisfied with what you've created, you can hop on in to the explanatory or summary panel, and you can get information to interpret. So what does the decision tree look like for this model? What variables were most important? It looks like here the price of a rental was most dependent on the number of reviews, which could be a stand-in value for actually the number of stays. So more popular, more reviews, potentially higher price. And the room type being private. So having a private room being very important to how much something will cost. Makes sense to me. If you want, you can calculate partial dependency plots, subpopulation analysis, or get individual explanations. And then you can do a sort of what if analysis where you adjust information about each of the features. For example, if I changed maximum nights on this individual listing to be lower, how would it change my prediction up here? Then, once you're satisfied with the way that you are interpreting the model itself, so how the predictions are correlated to the features, you can come over to the performance and see how it actually did compared to the true real-life adjusted prices, as well as error distribution and metrics and assertions. All of this can actually be exported. So to model documentation, which is basically a Word document that you take away and use to explain to everyone why your new set of predictions is so genius. Or it can be used to deploy onto the flow like we have here. And then with new data that you want to predict, so completely unseen or unlabeled data sets, or on data that you've already known to evaluate how the model is performing. That's one that I've chosen here. And you can see that I've selected no sampling. I'm using the active version and I'm keeping all of my outputs. And that I then get a metrics and a predictions data set. So my predictions data set, if I scroll all the way to the right-hand side, is going to show me the prediction that I have, as well as the error and relative error. So a lot of info, which kind of opens up its own set of analyses potential, right? So could start looking at how this model is performing over time. I could start looking at how this model is performing with new sets of data or in different cities. It looked like all of our entries here were from Madrid, for example, and it could be that we're interested in how it performs in Orlando or in Rome or in Singapore. Whatever it is, that is possible. And then I can also take this output and use it to compare sort of over time as the model is trained over and over or given new information. And one of the really great things that I'm hoping you're taking from this is so much of this is auto-generated for us, right? So the interpretation, the performance visualizations, everything that we sort of consolidated onto another dashboard, right? The decision tree and more. So we don't have to do a ton of busy work, if you want to call it that, whenever you're creating new algorithms or new iterations. So it's quite helpful. And all of the outcomes are archived. So you saw us create a new analysis, but regardless of how many are created in that lab, they are stored here. And this is the iteration with the number of models that were created. And the little weight is demonstrating that this is actually the deployed model. So if we continue to use this one as our deployed option, then we can go back in, we can see which algorithms were chosen. Again, you can see all of that information, as well as add in details or descriptions of what it is. So all of that to say, in a pretty quick amount of time, you can build a full flow, which allows you to ingest, prepare, enrich, cleanse, join, model, and distribute results. And you may be wondering what happens when you want to operationalize some of these results. So this is really the last part of what you will see here today, but I want to kind of expand on a few of the options. One, we've already touched on briefly, so dashboards. Sometimes pushing out results or charts via dashboard is what's needed to get insights to your business counterparts. You can also configure these dashboards to be updated more frequently or sent to an integration point. For example, a lot of our customers directly integrate with Tableau or Power BI. And then the next thing that you may want to do is actually automate some of the process. So in a scenario, you can come in and every 1 hour, every 1 month, week, day, etc., run through a set of steps. And these steps can be anything. I may want to build out my entire flow again, so that's the build option. I may want to export that dashboard I created, or update API endpoints or bundles, etc. And those are two components that are other ways that you may want to operationalize the work that you do. If that's the case, then what you'll need is to jump over to your API designer or bundles and migrate the work that you've done to your production environment. So the way that you move an entire project is with a new bundle, a name, and create. And this will be able to publish on deployer, as you can see here. This is an entirely separate infrastructure, which does not rely on any of what is available in your design environment. It is entirely segregated with different permissions and can be connected to production data sources so that your projects can be deployed on target infra with a couple of buttons. I deploy and activate, and there we go. I now have a project that is moved into production. As you can see, it was deployed successfully. If I go back to that deployments page, I now have healthy status. I can view every in-production project from here. In addition, I can create API endpoints. For example, I created this one on Friday. If I look at publishing it on a deployer, you can see that because I had a previous version, I am now being auto versioned, and I can go up into the API services and see all of them listed here. Again, healthy status, etc. is all listed, and my endpoint as well as sample code for how to interact with it is available to me. These are some of the most common ways that individuals take our products and move them into production. So either bundles for batch or offline scoring, or API endpoints for real-time or online scoring. And there are, of course, other ways to leverage things that we've built today, such as built-in web apps or using the Dataiku API. But for now, just know that we've designed DSS, or Dataiku Data Science Studio, with the end in mind. Getting your data science work off of the drawing room and out into the world is what we live for. And so I hope that some of what you've seen today has piqued your interest, and that when I open up the questions, there will be a few in there. But I know that we've talked about a tremendous amount of functionality, so I won't be upset if you are a little bit overwhelmed. And so I am just opening up that question section now, and I saw that there is a question about Dataiku ingesting streaming data. And Adam, you are in luck. Dataiku can ingest streaming data. We actually just released the functionality to do so in our most recent version, which is version 9 at the beginning of this year. So it's about 6 months old now, and we're happy to have that conversation a little bit further with you and understand your use case. And then someone asked, what were the terms you used earlier for the squares and circles? So to explain that, I'll just jump back in here. All of the squares are going to be called data sets. So if you see in the Dataiku documentation the word data sets, that's what it's referring to. You can see here most of mine are stored in S3. That's why they're the squares. These are flat file uploads, but the data sets themselves can come from really anywhere. So if I click on this top button, plus data set, you'll see I have SQL databases, your traditional relational databases, cloud storage, NoSQL, file systems, etc. So a lot of options. Can Dataiku users work with more advanced Plotly visualizations? Yeah, absolutely. So we actually just introduced support for Dash and Plotly in the web apps section. Unfortunately, I am no expert, but if you want to create more advanced visualizations, we have quite a few different options. So Python Bokeh, or Shiny, sort of standard web development. And these give you the option to expose the web app to the broader community. You don't need a Dataiku license to actually look at them. And then Nigel said, great demo, thank you. How do you best communicate in your demos the value you bring to businesses and organizations? This is a good question. I hope that I'm communicating that the biggest value that we bring is the ability to consolidate all of your data work in one place with all skill sets contributing to the best of their capabilities. So if users want to write Python directly inside of Dataiku, if users want to only use drag and drop, if someone wants a combination or is a SQL wizard, no matter what they are confident in, their skill sets can be used. And it means that all of the outcomes and sort of artifacts and objects that you create can be located in one place, they can be sent from one place and on a schedule. So ease of use, collaboration, reuse, and of course the one that the big bosses like, which is governance. So everything in one location, everything version controlled, everything documented. And then thank you, Stephanie, for reminding everyone if they want to ask a question live. Anonymous said, do you monitor models in production? Example, data drift or concept drift. Also, do you support deep learning use cases? Example, vision and NLP. And so the first question, do you monitor models in production? Yes, we do. There are a couple ways that you can set up custom metrics around your models. So that is to say, if you wanted to monitor performance, for example, maybe AUC, maybe R2 score, something along those lines, we can have it on that schedule again. So like the scenario, to check that value after retraining on whatever schedule or trigger that you'd like. And then we also have the option to perform data drift in that data that's being used to train the model itself, so difference there, as well as the drift in the data that was used to train versus new data into the model. So things like fugacity or drift metrics can all be monitored. And then do we support deep learning? Yes. So a couple of different ways that you can do it. If you need AutoML assisted deep learning, you will have the option to do it here. That will give you a baseline, sort of a framework, if you will. You'll have to write some of the architecture yourself, but it supports like Keras and TensorFlow. And then if you want to do alternative styles of deep learning, we have a pretty comprehensive set of plugins, which I can hopefully pull up, which are basically free extensions of the platform for you to try out. So here is a whole bunch, and the deep learning specific ones on images, object detection, speech to text, and then we also have some if you wanted to do more NLP use cases. I'm just going back and forth between the chat and the Q&A. I appreciate you guys using both. Thanks. I'll just pause and see if there's any more questions at this time. Seems that Dataiku supports integration with Google, AWS, and Azure. Are there any key differentiators? So we do support all of them. I will say that our one of our key investments came from Google. So I can definitely not stress enough how much that has led to some co-development. But it's pretty great across all of them. I would say majority of our customer base is honestly on AWS. I don't know if you guys all sort of feel the same way, but it feels that they have a large market share, especially I'm up in Canada and they have a big hold on the market. But no real differences as long as they have the virtual machine. So for us, we're installed on a Linux VM. We can connect to any of the traditional relational databases. We can take advantage of sort of any of the major columnar databases from each of the providers. All of them have managed Kubernetes services now that we integrate with. It's pretty comparable across all of them, if you will. And then hopefully, Nigel, that answered your question. Just let me know if you had any follow-up to that. And then Anonymous asked, do you log the serving traffic somewhere, i.e. the traffic in production? If yes, where do you store those? Yes, so I'm assuming that you mean for real-time scoring use cases. And if that's the case, then you can check out the Dataiku event server. It's a separate piece of infrastructure, which is going to log all of your requests. And with that, you can actually, it's just like a simple HTTP server. But with that, you can potentially start to develop like ground truth, right? You can like analyze as the requests come in, like potency, like eventual like metrics around the actual individual requests. But it's just called the event server. I can put it in the chat. Yeah, and so that will work sort of like as an audit trail from all of the different nodes that are serving like API inputs. Yeah, so Anonymous asked, can you compare yourself to SageMaker? This is a really good question. And I will be honest, like we partner with AWS, and so we do have an integration with SageMaker. The way that I like to think about it is that SageMaker themselves came out maybe a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer than that, but basically came out with this paper that explained how it's amazing for deploying model endpoints, right? I think that if you've ever used it, like that is really where their strength lies. But the sort of 70% of the work that is leading up to deploying those endpoints, so the data ingestion and the preparation and the cleaning and the entire like flow orchestration, I think is the words that they used, was really not something that they wanted to handle or would foresee themselves handling. And I think that's a really great place for us to be. So if I want to compare Dataiku to SageMaker, what I would say is we're really a platform for your experimentation. And there's this buzzword in the industry about democratization, but I think that that is something that we really embody. So making data science machine learning, and like the broader kind of ecosystem available to people who are not experts at writing Python code. And SageMaker is definitely more of like a point solution intended to help individuals who can already write their own Python deploy that as a model endpoint somewhere. Depending on your maturity, it's possible that you could get away with just using SageMaker, but I think for a larger organization with broader skill sets and more use cases, Dataiku makes a lot of sense. Hopefully that's diplomatic enough. And then can you also compare yourself to DataRobot? Hello, Anonymous. I see you're looking at a lot of our kind of competitive space. That's awesome. Yes, of course. DataRobot is really intending to make AutoML accessible, which we completely agree with. I think where we differ is, again, in the sense that we're trying to be like a platform where you come on and do everything. So all of that initial analysis, all of the statistical analysis, the like end visualizations, the preparation, etc., and then the AutoML. And so we don't just focus on AutoML. If we want to give them their credit where credit is due, they have I would say more focus on like getting sort of perfect accuracy. Ours is about giving you the tools to build the models in the way that you want. So I know that one of the things that they do is build as many models as possible. Sometimes those are like broad ensemble models that potentially you can understand. I don't know, Anonymous, maybe you really get what they're doing, but it would be difficult for a lot of people to then explain or use in a business context. Whereas, as you saw sort of in this demo, hopefully, that all of the choices that go into our AutoML can be easily traced back and can be identified, could be sort of reverse engineered, if you wanted to call it that. So I'll say, to scale it back, big difference is that we're trying to focus on the whole life cycle of doing data science, not just AutoML. So again, they're sort of focused on like one aspect of it. And then also that their goal may be accuracy and our goal may be explainability and like business applicability, if that's a word. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm just waiting for Anonymous to say, can you compare yourself to? And then another vendor, but it's no problem. I don't mind. There's a lot of cool companies in this space. Just give it a second. And also, just in case you weren't checking the chat, but you're still with us, Stephanie is on my team. She's lovely. Hello, Stephanie. She is just sharing a couple of links in the chat. It's like a little bit of additional content that you might find interesting to take a look at, is what she said, taking her words. But basically, it's some of the content that our teams have made, whether it's the data science team themselves or some of the marketing team. And there's one called Dataiku 9 capabilities that'll walk you through a whole bunch of new stuff that we've put out just for version 9. There's a demo more aimed at coders. So a lot of what we looked at today was just using the drag and drop. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. You can absolutely use Dataiku if you are a more hardcore developer. You can use like with your favorite, IDE. You can use the Jupyter notebooks, sort of whatever you want. So you might want to take a look at that. And then someone asked, so how do you price yourself? Is this per user or per server? And we actually do both. So depending on if you start with like a low tier license or go all the way up to enterprise, it will depend on how exactly we price you out. I don't actually know if you can contact me on this platform after Anonymous, but if you wanted to, I'm sure you can grab my contact information. And then if you want to send like, more detailed questions about like your specific pricing, I would be happy to help you. But yes, it depends on basically are you going to be putting servers all over the world or in one continent, and then how many people are going to be doing it. So hopefully that helps. And then do Dataiku customers report out using Power BI or Tableau? What split do you see there? Yeah, so that is a huge use case for Dataiku, is powering those dashboards and like visualizations. I would say a lot of our larger customers are using both Power BI and Tableau, depending on like the division or what they're specifically doing. I'm not sure I would know like a total split, but just in case you're curious, some of the other like vendors in that space that we also work with, obviously we have a good relationship with Tableau. We work with Power BI. We work with Click, Looker, like really any like visualization tool, because ultimately we're just like the data layer behind it. Probably Tableau is the one that we have the tightest integration with, and that's just because their engineering team has been super receptive to working with our engineering team. So you can actually, which is cool, build models inside of Dataiku and then like retrain them from Tableau. So if you have some users who are like power users of Tableau, you could, really empower them with that ability. And then Adam said, is Dataiku platform operational and used for runtime? So I assume what you mean is, can you put models into production? And the answer is yes. So you can put models into a production environment that is doing like batch or offline scoring. And you can also put models into production that are doing real time or like online scoring. And so Dataiku has three concepts. One of them is the design node, where we spent all of our time today. So that's like the development environment. There's the automation node, where you put production projects. And then there's the API scoring node, where you would send any real-time traffic. And these can get as large as needed, and they can also integrate with like a Kubernetes cluster for high availability and scalability of like the requests that are coming in. And then, second, I think another question just came in. Is there a max size on the data set imported into the system? In general, where are those stored during pipeline processing? This is an amazing question. Thank you. You actually caught me on something that I don't think I brought up, but Dataiku is really working off of samples of the data unless you explicitly tell it to import the whole data set into the platform. So what will happen is this, for example, is stored along the way in S3. And so you will not pay for like data movement because the data is staying there. That could easily be a Snowflake database or, Oracle, or it could be wherever you want, really. And so there's no max size on the data set imported into the system. In general, where are they stored? They are stored in general in the same source system, or at very large customers, they're stored in like a kind of landing zone, which has been dedicated for like data science projects. So it's not connected to like development data. It's just like a kind of tertiary location that is for all of those intermediary data sets. We also have a macro that you could run, which is just like, similar to like an Excel macro, which cleans up all of the intermediary data sets when you don't need them anymore to save you space. But yes, so no limitation and no degradation to performance, regardless of how big it is, because again, you're only ever looking at a sample when you like click into a data set inside of Dataiku. So at any step, you download the sample into the compute node, do the operation, and upload the result. It depends. So inside of Dataiku, you have the option to run your transformations wherever you want. This one, for example, is running on the Dataiku server itself. So in that case, it would work in the way that you're suggesting, pulling it in, running the computation, and then putting the output back. However, if this was happening in database, then it would actually convert the Dataiku transformation into a SQL query, run it in database, and leave the output in the database. So the data wouldn't have to transfer. And then similarly, if it was happening in Spark, the Spark nodes can communicate with the data in its location. So for example, like in the S3 bucket or wherever. And then you don't ever need to bring the data into Dataiku. So Sorry, Anonymous, that the answer is like, it depends, but yes, it depends. How do you optimize for model performance in Dataiku before you deploy? This is a great question, Nigel. Thank you. And potentially above what I do specifically. So unfortunately, we have a team of data scientists who probably go into all of the ways that you can optimize. But I will say some of the functionality inside of the AutoML or the dedicated like coding environment is there to give you what we call diagnostics. So they're like these little helpful hints on ways that you could make the performance run better or the model be more accurate, more precise, etc. So you could follow some of that suggestion, or one of the things that the platform makes available to you is a ton of experimentation. So you could simply view, the result time or like training time versus performance for a variety of the models and then make the choice yourself. So again, I hate to do the it depends answer, but it depends on the use case. It depends where the data is stored. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but my contact information should be in this platform. So either Anonymous or Nigel, if you wanted to reach out to me directly, and like if you just give me like a little bit of information about your specific use case, I'd be happy to like walk through how it could work. And then do we support time series forecasting? Yes, we do. We support time series forecasting using Python libraries, and you can custom code it, of course, either in Python or in R. And I'm just checking. Oh, thank you, Nigel. I'm glad that it was helpful. So I think we have about 1 minute left. Hopefully I was able to answer all of your guys' questions. Those were really good questions. I really appreciate it. I was worried no one was going to be listening, so I'm glad you guys were here. Again, if you want to reach out, absolutely, you can reach out to me directly, or you can go to our website. It's www.dataiku.com. We have a free version of the platform that you can try. We have an online community where you can chat with existing users and members. We have a training environment called the Academy. So you could take like free courses and learn how to use it. And you can request like a demo that's custom to your use case or your business, your industry, etc. So we're happy to help you sort of however we can. And Stephanie just shared our website, so dataiku.com, and the way that you can contact us. So I'm going to keep it open for the next minute or so, and then I think I have to drop for our next presenter. So thank you guys so much for joining. Thanks for all your comments in the chat. Thanks for joining, guys. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. And thank you, Stephanie, for helping in the chat as well. And with that, we are finished. Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.